Welcome back to the Starved Rock Murders. I'm your host, Andy Hale, with my trusty sidekick, Sally Cohen. Sally, happy Friday as we record this.
Happy Friday.
So, again, I've given you very little information in terms of where I'm going today, which I think is fun. So I originally, and I still want to talk about this Winders family murder-suicide that apparently took place a few days after the Starved Rock murders. And that was my intent, to talk about that today. But in doing that, in reading some articles about the Winder, murders, most of the articles were dated like March 21st, March 20th and 21st. Well, if you remember, March 20th was the day the crime lab met to discuss their forensic findings in the case. And I've talked about those findings a lot. There's handwritten notes that say things like blood on club did not result from hitting, no explanation for missing fingertip, 2 different kinds of twine, 20 strand, 10 strand. Remember all that stuff?
Yep. Very important document.
Yeah, huge document. And then this is, I can't believe I haven't talked about this more. So it's a 2-page document. And on page 2, and I'm going to have to post this again. On page 2 at the bottom, and I'm pulling it up now, and I'll try to show this. This is the bottom of page 2. And at the bottom right over here, it's got some names. But let me give you some context. In reading articles about the Winder murders, some of the articles also mentioned the Starved Rock murders. So one of the articles, let me pull it up, is from... Let's see, this is an article from the Chicago Tribune, Monday, March 21st, okay? This is the headline, Seek 2 Slain Suspects. Huge article. So on page 2 of that article, it says, I'll read you, it says, tests for persons. They have administered lie tests to 4 other persons. Those who will take lie tests include a dishwasher, a busboy, the operator of a bait shop, and a stable hand at the state park. And then it says a 5th man is also scheduled to be tested. Okay, so let's think about that. I'll say those names again. A dishwasher, a busboy, the operator of a bait stand, and a stable hand, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, when I looked at those notes, the bottom, it's got Chester Weger's name on there. And below his name is a guy named Art Askew, like Askew. And to the right are the names James Kavanaugh, Floyd Kavanaugh Sr., Kavanaugh's father, Henry Wolford. Henry Wolford's the guy who ran the search party.
Right.
I remember when I first talked about these notes in court and was telling the judge that these were contemporaneous notes of a crime lab meeting on March 20th, which is what it says at the top. It says meeting 3/20/60, 7 p.m. Okay. And I remember Will County saying, no, this is weird. These notes don't make any sense because it mentions Chester Weger at the bottom. And I think she was implying, the state's attorney, that these were written at different times. Well, you know what? Now I think for the first time I kind of realized they were not. Because this March 21st article talking about a dishwasher, that's Chester Weger. And then when it talks about a stable hand, I just realized that is James Kavanaugh, who's on these notes too. Floyd Kavanaugh Sr. ran the stable that was right, like I think across the street from Starved Rock State Park. And his son James, I believe, was the stable boy that they're referring to. And then Art Askew, I went back and looked at my documents for that name. There was a May 16th memo I'm holding up, and it says they took red fibers from the shirt of Art Askew. So he was a suspect. He's listed on a May 16th document. So my point is, I believe these handwritten notes of these names jive with this March 21st Chicago Tribune article talking about they're going to give lie tests to the dishwasher, the busboy, the guy who owns the bait shop, and the guy who's the stable hand, because two of those names are on here.
Right.
Chester
Absolutely.
Weger, the dishwasher, and James Kavanaugh. So let's pause there.
Mm-hmm.
That just, I cannot believe I have not talked more about Chester's name being on this document, because it kind of changes things. And what I think it changes is why Chester in September, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I did these presentations recently, the way I've kind of described it is once the Palmatier brothers evaporate at the end of August, early September, that's when Harlan Warren starts his secret investigation, brings in Stephen Kindig. Oh, Chester Weger failed his polygraph. And I just thought, well, maybe they just were, I mean, they were testing lodge employees, but you know what? Maybe it's because they thought, let's go back to a name we had on our notes early on, Chester Weger. What do you make of all this? And I'm still processing this on my end.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me that they would have any names basically based off of without any reason for those names. I guess they're assuming that it's people that maybe had the opportunity based on proximity. It doesn't seem like what you said, Art Askew had fibers. They're taking red fibers from his clothing and they know that there were red fibers at the scene. There's some basis for that name to be there. I think it's interesting. Like, I don't think it actually answers the question of why Chester to me still. Why Chester in the beginning?
No.
Why was Chester on that list?
Yeah.
And
No.
I don't think there's ever a good explanation. There's no evidence.
Yeah, this is really interesting. For some reason, it sounds like at the end of this meeting, they're talking about some suspects, because above that, there's even some writing about another name. It's hard to read. It says George, the last name starts with a B. It looks like Browers. It says boy's father, very violent, supposed to have been around Princeton on March 14th. Then there's two names, even two words written above. And Chester Weger and Art Askew, above that is the word Batavia. I don't know what this means, but this is really fascinating. I had never noticed, and the only reason I was focusing on these March 21st articles on the Star Murders is because they're talking about the Winder murders. So I'd never really noticed about this whole idea that they're going to give lie tests to these four particular people that they singled out. So there's some reason, they don't say why, like you say. It's curious they would have Chester's name down there, and then obviously nothing comes of it. I mean,
Right.
He's mentioned in these March 20th notes, and nothing comes of it because March goes by, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. I mean, he's given 6 polygraphs, so.
Right. Well, and especially given that their early leads all said about, the people that were in the car or outside the car, and Chester didn't have a car. So it's the leads that they had didn't point to Chester.
No. And some of these articles, in fact, the article I mentioned to you, this big Chicago Tribune article, March 21st, when it has the headline, Seek 2 Slain Suspects, it's based on that John Kovalik tip, the guy driving by the park and sees a guy on the side of the road talking to the women. And there's a guy, at least one guy in the car, and it says it's around 2:00. Well, remember, in my presentation, Emil Bohm, who worked with Chester, said he saw him in the men's bathroom at like 2:40. Well, this driver is seeing the women talking to a guy on the side of the road around 2:00. We know that car's got to be involved, right? It's got to be involved. Right. Whoever's in that car talking to those women is involved. Because we've never, ever been able to figure out who that is. Those guys are involved. And based on the time, it cannot be Chester Weger. But I just wanted to note, we'll have to talk about this some more. These March 20th notes that say Batavia - Chester Weger, Art Askew, and then James Kavanaugh, Floyd Kavanaugh Sr.
How far is Batavia from Stark Rock? Batavia, Illinois, right? How far is that?
Yeah, I think it's a decent distance.
Yeah.
I think Batavia is near Aurora.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I just dropped this on you, so I want you to process this, and we'll have to have further discussion about it. But
Well, when you first dropped the murders on me, one thing that I actually came to mind is, and I think it's worth clarifying that it's very clear that when Lois Zalensek was overhearing the conversation about the murders, and they're talking about a big write-up in the paper, I think the judge said, "Oh, there's no proof that it was actually the Starved Rock murders." I guess hypothetically they could have been talking about these murders, but as we'll get into, these murders, there were no bloody overalls in the trunk of a car. They were a murder suicide. So I think, like, what other murders were there? I think it's interesting that the judge could try to make some sort of link that is kind of not supported by the evidence, even though there were suspiciously two murders at the same time, or two mass murders. The
yeah,
timing of this is
and
all interesting.
yeah, the thing about the Winters murders, and we can transition to that. The Winters murders. So there's a few things that are weird about it. So just for the reader, for the listeners and out there, I've talked about it a little bit, but I think it's discovered. There's a guy. There's a family, the Winters family, and it's a husband, William Winder. He's 29, his wife, and they've got 3 kids, all under the age of 5. And they are found dead. The kids had been shot in their bed, and William and his wife are found like on the living room floor. William Winters and Patricia, 28. Interestingly, the articles talk about Dummett investigates this. Okay, let's just keep that in mind. Dummett investigates this. So what caught my eye was this. The articles first say they think the husband killed the kids, killed his wife, and then killed him. Then the articles say, no, we don't think that, because 2 things. The husband's got a gunshot wound to his forehead. She has it to the side of her temple, and they think, people that usually commit suicide shoot themselves on the side of in the temple, not in the forehead. And apparently her body is found on top of his, meaning she would have been killed second and fallen on him. But the thing I find weird about it in general, before I get to a forensic point, it's just awfully odd that within days there's this other kind of mass murder locally. Doesn't it just seem weird? And what kind of struck me about it was, and I saw some of these articles saying, oh, that maybe the wife had talked about being distraught. I see this article here from the Southern Illinoisan. Said a friend said she had talked about marital troubles recently. Well, I don't know, man. Are you going to kill your 3 kids under the age of 5?
Right.
And I also think women are less likely to do that to their kids.
And especially with
Do
a
you agree
gun,
with that?
Yes,
Yeah, with a gun
I
too.
absolutely agree with that. That's a very rare thing for a woman to do.
So she's got marital troubles, and she's gonna shoot these 3 kids, and then shoot her husband and kill herself with a gun. It's weird, don't you think?
I think it's very weird. You hear about family annihilators, typically men, and people who kill themselves with a gun are typically men as well.
And here's the icing on the cake of this being weird, and this is what really gets my antennas up. Now it's on March 28th, so about a week's gone by. There's an article in the Times Streeter. Evidence in Seneca deaths inconclusive. It says state laboratory tests have failed to reveal any powder deposits on the hands of either William or his wife Patricia that might indicate who wielded the gun that brought brought death to them and their children in their Seneca home. So there's no gunshot residue on either one of them. That really now has my interest. It just is not making sense. What are your thoughts on that?
I do find it very strange, and I wonder what the forensic capabilities for doing gunshot residue tests were like at the time, but nowadays they're extremely sensitive, and you would expect to see that.
Well, these articles talked about doing a paraffin test, and they made it sound like that's just kind of a routine test. So we'll have to check that out. But I mean, obviously they thought they could. The articles talked about they're going to do that test,
Right.
and they talked about the results. They didn't find anything. So it sounds like they had the capabilities to do it, and they did it. They just didn't find any substance, any residue. Which, what struck me when I heard this is what kind of caught my eye initially. Under what we believe happened in the Starbuck murders, and I think we pretty much are on point. Miss Murphy is targeted, but all three have to die to make it look like something else. Okay. And I'm not saying the Winders thing could be weird, but if it's not one of the parents doing this, then who did it and why? So I also thought it was kind of like similar to Starve Rock in that maybe four of the people were collateral damage. I'm just saying, I'm just hypothetical. I have no evidence. I'll be clear. I have no evidence for this. I'm just spitballing. But if there was some reason, let's say, to kill the husband or the wife, by killing all five in this fashion, it is now labeled a murder-suicide. There's articles on this for a couple days. These results come back. They convene a coroner's jury who rules that the wife did it. And that's it. I went into newspapers.com. I mean, within a week, there's nothing on this. It's case closed. Whereas if just the dad would have been shot and killed and murdered, you'd constantly be saying, why? Who'd have a motive to kill him? So the articles talk about, could there be a link between Starve Rock murders? They all say, well, they don't see anything, but I'm putting it out there for the fact that I do believe it deserves some attention. I don't have a link right now, but what I have and what we've shown is the official version doesn't make much sense. That the wife killed everybody, and there's no residue on her hands, no gunshot residue. So who the heck knows, Sally Cohen? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's it reminds me also, we have another suspicious death in this case, which is Edward Bray's. And I think similarly, even if the husband or wife did do it, it could have been still had some involvement with the Starve Rock murders. The stress of the event, or being emotionally disturbed by something. I think even if it wasn't an outside job, the proximity to the murders is relevant, or could be.
Yeah, I just think, and again, I have no basis to say this. In my mind, the only possible link that kind of made sense was, could, like, for instance, the dad have seen something, have known something? He lives in Seneca. Didn't Bray work at the Seneca shipyards?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like Mr. Winders worked at a factory in Marseilles. But you don't know. I mean, all I'm saying is it's awfully weird that there's this other mass murder within days. The official explanation makes no sense. And I always people have asked me about it over the years. I mean, there's been interest in it. A lot of people have asked me about it, and every time it came up, I just basically would say no, like kind of conclusively, like, no, definitely not related. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I think what I'm saying now is I'm opening my mind to the possibility of there being more. And I think I'm going to do a little more poking around about it. We got a little bit of time on our hands. I think something just seems off to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder, down that rabbit hole where it would take you, if there were other people that knew something. I mean, I think that the suspicious deaths that sort of surround the incident, maybe he was a participant, similarly to Edward Bray. We know that there were likely multiple people down in the canyon. And it wouldn't surprise me. Again, it sort of jives with our theory that the mafia did it if they're eliminating people.
Yeah.
I'm not a
Well,
mafia
you think
expert,
about
though.
it. Yeah. Bodies are now showing up. There's definitely multiple people. And having been down in that canyon numerous times myself, even in the winter, I've been down there in the winter. And every time I've gone there, there's at least a couple people walking their dog. They want to see the frozen waterfall. It's the focal point. It's beautiful. So really, the odds of this being a completely clean triple murder and nobody saw the guys walking into the canyon, nobody saw the guys coming out of the canyon, nobody saw any of this, although, we know that John Kovalik saw, the car by the side of the road. That was huge. But I think the odds of nobody seeing anything is slim. So, food for thought. The Winders family murders. We may never know. We probably will never know. But when I was seeing just some of those findings, my gut check is telling me something is off.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, just to think about the added pressure of these murders all happening at the same time that the police were under, and that the state attorney's office was under. There would have been a lot of pressure on them to solve these crimes quickly. And I think by putting that Winders thing to bed, maybe against the weight of the evidence, they were able to, run for re-election, etc. And so I think Dummett's involvement here, we can't put anything past him, in terms of
and it's just kind of quickly closed. They there's this article on March 28th about the test. It was a .22 caliber pistol, and it says in here too. At first, authorities assumed the husband did the shooting, but now they're convinced that the gun was fired by the wife. Her fatal wound was in the temple, and he was shot in the forehead. Well, they would have known that right from the start. It wasn't any kind of thing new. Bodies were discovered Saturday, March 19th, but apparently the lights have been on in the house for like 2 days, and a neighbor saw this weird thing and went over there and tried to knock on the door. So that puts it back a couple days. 17th, like the day around the time the bodies are found. And so even if the wife is despondent, like it's quoting a pastor saying, again, shooting 3 kids under the age of 5. I'm not buying it. I think we should do a little more poking around. And while I'm doing this, I've got those crime lab notes in front of me, and I know we've talked about these so often, but you cannot overstate the significance of some of the stuff in these notes. And I'm looking at the part. Blood on club did not result from hitting. Period. Boom. It's not the murder weapon. It says, limb was old, bark was soft, high moisture content. Remember that we had that newspaper article, not it was 38 degrees on the day of the murders?
Yeah.
How is that not just, and then it's, they have to.
No explanation for the fingertip. They note that in the notes themselves. They say no explanation.
No explanation for end of finger missing, hole in glove. And they got 2 types of twine on here. And these articles are talking about the twine being cut in 2 different ways. Mm-hmm. It just, oh my gosh. It's crazy that these forensic findings just down the road when Chester confesses all got ignored. Nobody's talking about it. That was the extent of the cover-up. Nobody from the crime lab came out and said, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So I think all we've accomplished today is raised about 1,000 more rabbit trails to go down. So that'll be fun.
Morenewspapers.com.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the Winders family murders. I wanted to talk about Chester being in these notes with these other names, like you said, why? Why on earth would you have Chester Weger's name on there? And then, even if you had some suspicion, he's cleared because he passes 6 polygraphs and nothing happens until they basically take him down to the station in November, 8 months later.
And what happens to all these other suspects? How were they cleared? We know how they cleared the volunteers, but how did they clear all the other people that they're doing, taking fibers from, et cetera? We don't see anything about.
Yeah, and I'd like to know more about this Art Askew guy because I've got this document and I'll have to post this. It's this May 16th memo, and it just lists people that they're taking evidence from, and I just found this in my emails. It's, it's an Illinois State Police hair and fiber samples. So, I'll just give you some of the names, and maybe people out there, maybe some of these names will ring a bell. They took hair fibers from 10 people. Earl Goodrich, Frank Alberry, Ronald Brandeis, like Dies, Robert Kokurek, Leroy Laythorpe, Bobby Carroll Gordo, Gordoh, Kenneth Harold, George Pollock, Donald Dillon, and Arthur Patek, Patek. And then it says fiber samples from the following named are enclosed. Red fibers from shirt owned by Art Askew, Askew. Red and black plaid fibers removed from jacket owned by George Spiros. Why are they taking things from those people? And who are they? God, I got so many questions.
Right. Well, one of the biggest questions that's always been there is, why are they just looking at local people when the women weren't from the local area? And, it seems like a motivated crime, not a crime of opportunity. It's just, that is baffling. It doesn't need to be somebody that works at the lodge or is local. When you've got cars coming down.
Right. And remember in my presentation, I've got that newspaper article that quotes Nick Spiros, who runs the lodge, saying he was pretty sure. I think he said 70% sure the women got followed down here from Riverside. Like whoever committed the murders, because what he said was, and this is so true, and I talk about this, the women check in, they go to their rooms, they have lunch, they leave, and they're killed immediately. They leave and they're killed. So that sure sounds like somebody followed them down. Okay, we're waiting for them to come out. Here they are, they've come out, and they're killed. They're murdered. It's just, that too is no just coincidence. Oh, they ran into Chester Weger on his lunch break. No, and in fact, again, Emo Bohm says he's in the men's bathroom at 2:40, and we see this guy on the side of the road talking to the women like a little before 2 o'clock. No, none of this adds up. All right, well, I think I will put that out there for the listeners. If anybody has any comments, thoughts, ideas, please, you can email me. I've got a new email address. You can do it to andy@ahallelaw.com. So that's AHALE.com. I'm going to try to post some of these documents on the podcast website so you can see them. And Sally and I and Johan are working on some other legal stuff. Not quite ready to discuss it, but we are still basically exploring some options and seeing what else is out there. We are not done by any stretch of the imagination. You have not heard the last from us. So rest assured, we are still seeking justice for Chester Weger. As I like to say, justice has no expiration date. I firmly believe that. So it's been 10 years. I'll go another 10 years. I'm not going anywhere, So Sally, great seeing you. We'll get back on here and do another podcast soon, give an update. And until then, everybody, stay tuned.